Hello, my name is Dean Amhouse, and I want to welcome you to day 4 of the 2021 Virtual Water Leader Summit coming to you from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We start off this week following a great session, 3 sessions actually last week. We started off in Hawaii, unfortunately, not literally there, but virtually. The session made me think that we need to move beyond the idea of what we call oftentimes in the water world a one water approach when working in watersheds to more of a one infrastructure. On Wednesday, we heard from 3 panelists who offered insights into not just planning transportation networks to adjust to climate change, but also having to change mindsets to make communities much more climate resilient. We ended the week digging into the emergence of ESG, or environmental social governance, and its impact with respect to water. We heard from A.O. Smith and Impacts Asset Management. Both panelists stated that it may be daunting for some companies to improve their water stewardship work, but it is absolutely okay to start slow and grow. Better to do something instead of nothing was their comments. You can read my blog about the first week on the Water Council website. Helping to make this overall summit possible is through the generous support of our presenting sponsors, A.O. Smith and Baird, and our water leaders, including Badger Meter, Evoqua, Fund for Lake Michigan, MMSD's, Milorganite, Molson Coors, Sloan, Watts Water, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and Xylem. All wonderful sponsors, and we greatly appreciate their support. Before we get into today's program and session, I will ask Marissa from SignalWire to provide a few housekeeping comments on using today's platform.
Good morning. I just wanted to point out a few items for you in case you run into any technical difficulties today. In the top right corner of your screen, you'll see a question icon. If you click on that, you can start talking to any of our support members and they can help you work through any problems. In the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a little blue and pink bubbles, and that's your chat. If you click on that, it'll open up a chat window. Add any comments, any questions you may have, anything you'd like for everyone to see in the room. And if at any time during our panel discussion today, they ask for you to raise your hand if you have a question, there is a little hand at the bottom of your screen that you can click on. Thank you.
As part of our water summit for the last few years, when we've conducted it in person, we've recognized the individuals from the Milwaukee region who have gone out of their way to make a commitment to helping young people explore opportunities of water. While we could not be together in person this year, we still want to move forward with recognizing someone, and we are extremely pleased that Ecolab has stepped up to be the sponsor of the 2021 Water Leader Award. Water Warrior Award. Ecolab is the global leader in water, hygiene, and infection prevention solutions and services that protect people and vital resources. Ecolab has an outstanding record when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, workforce development, and community involvement. And we think was an excellent sponsor for this type of award. So this year, and Nick, you want to put up the photo? This year, I'm very proud and honored to announce that the 2021 Water Warrior Award recipient is Dr. Moe Mukiibi, President and CTO of Stonehouse Water Technologies. Dr. Moe is well-known, published water expert and a passionate technology innovator who has a long-standing, long-distinguished career working on projects across the United States, including Fortune 500 companies, and speaking across the world at water and technology conferences. In 2005, he founded Africa Children's Charity, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Tucson, Arizona, whose mission is to take in abandoned children and provide for their food, shelter, education, spiritual, family nurturing, and medical care, including HIV treatment. Here in Milwaukee several years ago, Dr. Moe, as we affectionately call him, started Moe's Minions program, and you'll see a picture on your screen, which has allowed students from the surrounding high schools to come to the Global Water Center to work on water quality projects. This program aims to train high school students who are historically underrepresented in water science and engineering to conduct innovative drinking water treatment research. We will present the actual award to Dr. Moe on September 16th when we have our first in-person meeting in probably 2 years at A.O. Smith's Corporate Technology Center. But to start off, I would like to open up to Emilio Tenuta from Ecolab as a sponsor for any comments that he has about Dr. Moe. Emilio?
Hey, thanks, Dean, for giving us the opportunity to recognize Dr. Moe. First of all, a heartfelt congratulations to Dr. Moe and your team from the 45,000 associates at Ecolab on your recognition today. As you know, we're very passionate at Ecolab about the topic of global water, and the point of your recognition, the creation of Moe's Minion program, which allows students from the surrounding high schools to come together around a critical challenge we all have, water quality. And so this highlights that importance that water quality has to water stewardship. So I want to congratulate you on behalf of Ecolab.
And fortunately, we have Dr. Moe with us. So Dr. Moe, could we bring him on and to say a few words, I believe?
Yes, I would like to thank Dean and the Water Council. I would like to thank Emilio and Ecolab for recognizing this important work we've been doing throughout a number of years. I am honored to receive this award, not for me, but for Moe's Minions, because they did all the hard work and all I do is provide direction. And some of them are going on to go to colleges, and that's the work the Water Council and myself are proud of. So like I said, I want to thank Ecolab, Emilio and Ecolab. I want to thank the Water Council for recognizing this work and the support they have given me throughout the year to continue this important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Moe. You really are an inspiration for a lot of students, and I know with great memories. You and I became acquainted by coincidence in Frankfurt, Germany, and that led us to be able to work together here in Milwaukee. So a terrific congratulations and well-deserved recognition. We would like to move now to, as we've done last week and continue this week, with recognizing some of our brew companies. We start and end each of our sessions with one of the companies that made their pitch as part of our Brew 2.0 program, our post-accelerator, which occurred last February. We were able to introduce 12 remarkable companies from the US, Canada, and Chile to participate in this reinvented post-accelerator to help them move and advance their companies. To learn more about our Brew 2.0 program on our website, stay tuned to more information coming out this fall on applications for the 2022 cohort. So with that, I would like to present the corn cob pitch video.
Hi, my name is Annie Huang, and I'm honored to be here representing a company that's going to be changing water, changing lives, Corn Cob Inc. So when an industrial business owner is looking to deal with their wastewater, they see big, expensive, energy-intensive solutions in conventional technology. They're simply incapable of taking out pharmaceuticals, microplastics, and PFAS. And right now we're just throwing out resources, both water and the recoverable resources in that water. So let me introduce you to Corn Cob. We have developed and patented the ultimate membrane system. That means we're able to reduce capital costs by 30%, operational costs by 50%, and building footprint by 80%. And this is all thank you to our rotating discs. So by rotating the discs, we're able to keep the membranes clean, and that means we're preventing plugging, and that also means we're able to maintain a higher flux for a longer period of time. This allows us to take in solids directly, so that's practically eliminating pre-treatment, providing unbelievable flexibility and ease of use for the end user. When compared to conventional treatment and other membrane technologies, we simply win in terms of CapEx and OpEx. In addition to these savings, we provide unparalleled flexibility and simplicity to fit the needs of our end user. So the containerized unit is a great example of this that you see on the screen. We have these 4 co-inventors to thank for this technology. They each have decades of experience in the wastewater industry, a deep understanding of engineering and technology, and that means that they know and have lived the pain points that we are addressing. So the markets that we're pursuing are in landfill leachate. We found a massive pain point in hauling costs to the point that landfills are shutting down over this. We're able to help by treating on site, and treating on site oftentimes mean that they're able to expand their landfill. They would also be able to address chronic wasting disease. So that would allow landfills to accept deer carcasses, which would again expand their business. Corn cob is also able to stop PFAS spread from the source, which is the landfill. In the food industry, of course, it's a huge industry, and there's a huge call for water reuse right now. They also have the type of waste stream where we know we can be competitive. The dirtier, the better, we always say. And again, when we process on site, we reduce their hauling costs. And we have sold projects in both of these industries, so we have the experience and expertise already. Our go-to-market strategy really is to support those who interact directly with the end user. We already have a well-established distribution and rep network who already have those connections. To further support our network, though, we have conceptualized the REACH program. So we envision having these locations across the nation in which we could do pilots, we could do training, and refurbish cartridges even, which would be a source of continuous revenue. We're seeking to raise $10.6 million, and that would go to help develop and grow our team of 6 to 20 to 30 people. And we want to expand our channels nationwide, so really focusing on those REACH hubs. Project working capital is key to our large long-term projects since they can take up to a year from concept to implementation. And really, most of all, we want to build multiple small mobile units, which would go to multiple different landfills or other sites and help with those hauling costs. We could charge by the gallon, and it would be an immediate source of revenue for us. Of course, they would serve as a sales and demonstration tool as well, and that would go out and support the REACH partners at their hubs. So I invite you to join us in flipping industrial wastewater treatment on its head, and in the process, changing water, changing lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annie. Now let's begin our program, and I want to remind people that you'll be able to ask questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and we'll be certainly wanting to include you into the discussion. Because of scheduling requirements, we had to do a taped interview with Sara Gonzalez-Rothi with Charles. They had an interview probably about 10 days ago. And so we'd like to be able to show you that video, and then we will have Emilio and Claudia providing a response to that comments and as well as their own insights. So let's go ahead with the interview between Charles and Sara.
Just a moment.
Hello, and welcome back to the 2021 Water Leaders Summit. I'm Charles Fishman, and today I'm with Sara Gonzalez-Rothi, who is the water czar inside the White House, the senior White House official for water issues in President Joe Biden's administration. Her formal title is Senior Director for Water on the Council for Environmental Quality inside the White House. And she's going to tell us in a few minutes what that actually means and what the Council for Environmental Quality does. But there's never been a person in a White House, at least in the modern era, with this level of access and influence whose only job is water. And so we're not only delighted to have Sara with us this morning, it's really good news in the world of water that there's someone at this level doing nothing but paying attention to water. We always like to give you a brief sense of who we're talking to. Sara Gonzalez-Rothi grew up in Gainesville, Florida. She is the daughter of two medical research scientist types. Her mother is actually a PhD scientist. Her father is an MD pulmonologist. And as she said, she grew up in Gainesville with an interesting tension between the kind of hippie counterculture college town world and then the world immediately outside the town of Gainesville, which is really a farming and agricultural community, in some ways an old Florida community. And Sara kind of slipped into the world of environmental policy, environmental science, environmental management in a really interesting, unintended way. She spent a lot of her childhood in the springs and rivers around Gainesville, around North Central Florida, as she said to me, swimming and tubing in Ginnie Springs, in Poe Springs, in Blue Springs. And we'll get this story from her, she didn't really connect that to her professional aspirations. She actually came from a family devoted to medicine and healthcare, and she thought that's what she'd do. And we're going to find out how she landed in the world of environmental policy instead. So we welcome Sara Gonzalez-Rothi. Sara, when you were young, you told me that the scariest moment while you were swimming in those beautiful crystal clear springs would be to have a piece of eelgrass wrap around your leg as a young girl, and then sort of have that moment of fright where you didn't know if the eelgrass was an alligator or a water moccasin or a gar or in fact a piece of eelgrass. And I, as a fellow Floridian, I totally relate to that moment. What's tickling me from down below. But you also told me that as you grew up swimming in those springs, tubing and canoeing in those rivers, you noticed a change. Tell me about the change you saw and what you were told about that.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Charles. I think, just briefly to describe what those springs look like, you've got periods of tannic water, looks like sweet tea, right, being from the south, interrupted by periodically these clear blue, beautiful spring waters. And in my childhood, in addition to the clear blue spring water and then the tannic sections of the river, you'd have these big eelgrass beds. And The Creature from the Black Lagoon, I think, was actually filmed at Silver Springs, so very close to the springs that I grew up swimming in. And you can imagine that's what you see as you are tubing down this river.
When you're a 9-year-old.
Right. And so eelgrass will come up and wrap around your ankle, and you have that moment of, is it something that's going to injure me? Well, as I grew, the eelgrass beds reduced, and you stopped feeling eelgrass, and you stopped seeing the critters that we were used to seeing and being afraid of on the river. And you started seeing an overgrowth of something called lingdia, which is an algae. Doesn't have that like broad leaf like an eelgrass does. The water levels themselves started to get lower and lower. And so there were times when you'd have to get out of your tube and move it down the river to continue on. And I wondered what was happening. And what I was told at the time was South Florida is stealing our water. Well, what does that mean? Well, the state of Florida is basically one big porous limestone aquifer. If you can imagine, Gainesville's in the center of the state. And if you dig in Gainesville, you'll find one of two things, shark's teeth or water. And so it wasn't a big stretch to think South Florida is sticking a hole in that Floridan aquifer and sucking it right out of North Florida. It wasn't quite the truth, and I came to find that out later on in life, but it was certainly an interesting image for me.
Well, and an interesting introduction to the idea of two things that Americans are really bad at. One is even just understanding the basics of where their water comes from, right? That was a little window into where the water was coming from. And this much more sophisticated but equally important notion that water systems are interrelated. They aren't all interrelated, but what happens in one place often has a significant impact on what plays out in another place. So let's take a big picture slice just for a moment. You're the senior water official in the Biden White House. You deal with water issues and their connection to climate change and all kinds of other things I would assume every hour of every day, at least only while you're awake, but maybe even sometimes when you're dreaming. What we've seen happening this year alone, thinking back to the Texas storm and all of the consequences of that, direct impact on water. We had water utilities have their major metropolitan water utilities had their electricity turned off, which meant that they turned the water off to whole cities in Texas. And now all the way forward to unprecedented, unusual flooding in Michigan, incredible, unprecedented heat in the Pacific Northwest, even as we speak right now in Arizona and New Mexico. The Colorado River is at its lowest level ever. Lake Mead, Lake Powell, headed for literally official crisis designation. The Mississippi River in the headwaters at the top of the Mississippi River, lowest level in many, many years. What do you see happening across the country related to climate change, and how are we supposed to think about it?
Right. So I think, a threshold matter here is one that you raised in the commentary on my last answer related to the water cycle. And so my 3.5-year-old son has learned about the water cycle and how everything is interrelated. So it's easy to think of water in a silo, but the truth is that it's interrelated with land policy, it's interrelated with emissions and energy policy, and it's integral to both the effects we're seeing from climate change, but also hopefully integral to action to mitigate the effects of climate change. And what the scientists tell us, I'm not a scientist, but I know where to find them, is that we're going to see more and more unexpected and intense events. And what does that mean from the water context? You look to the coast, obviously, when you see hurricanes and those sorts of phenomena, but the other dynamic to that is water where it's not supposed to be, or water that's not where we anticipate it. So flooding and drought, like we've seen. And I think we know that even if we were able to stop all greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, there are climate impacts baked into the water cycle that we're going to face in a very real way over the next several decades.
There's momentum, in other words.
There's momentum, exactly. And so you asked about what do I think about every hour of the day? Well, I'm scheduled in 30-minute intervals.
Because these problems are solvable in about 28 minutes.
And I do think about these things even when I'm sleeping or not sleeping, as the case may be, because I have a 4-month-old in addition to my 3.5-year-old. So the good news is I think about it around the clock. The bad news is, even with phenomenal folks thinking about it around the clock, climate change is the existential challenge of my lifetime and of my children's lifetime.
And where does water sit in that? When you say climate change is the existential challenge, but you're the water person, so how connect the dots for us? I mean, right. We in the world of water, I'm an ex officio member, but the world of water has come to believe that water is the center of climate change impact and mitigation in many ways. Is that how you think of it?
Absolutely. So when you think about the major water challenges we face, you used to have this little framework of quality, quantity, distribution, and timing. And I think that those 4 things, you can see how the climate impacts each of those. So quality, right? If we're having more heat and less precipitation, You have a challenge where you've got saline water where you probably need fresh water. Quantity, same issue. We don't have precipitation events in arid climates. We don't get the snowpack we need. That snowpack melts sooner. It hits dry soils that are parched, and you wind up having significant drought impacts. Timing, like I said, if you have a winter that doesn't last as long into the springtime and you have an earlier snow melt, our ecosystems are not prepared for that. Distribution, where in the country is the rain falling? Where is it not falling? So all of those elements kind of come into play when it comes to the climate change impacts we're going to be seeing. As far as a solution, water moves sediment, it moves soil. So you talked a little bit about the upper Mississippi. You can't talk about water without talking about soil, which leads to land, right? And so Mississippi used to be called Big Muddy because influxes of water come from the Great Lakes region, and in the spring snow melt come down the Mississippi River, carve out the channels, pull up sediment, and that sediment then replenishes the Bird's Foot Delta at the end of the Mississippi River, growing land. We have changed the way that the Mississippi works, and as a result, when you compound that with climate change, you're going to have more severe impacts to people and communities. Yes, to the environment, which is the Council on Environmental Quality's charge, but at the end of the day, it's impacts to people. So how do you use the environment to thwart the impacts of climate change? Well, we know that a healthy functioning ecosystem stores carbon. And so in the oceans example, there's talk of what's called blue carbon. But that same sequestration happens in freshwater systems on land when they're healthy and working well. And we need to stem the tide of losing those ecosystems and losing the carbon sinks, and instead be restoring them.
Healthy, I love that. I've never heard it put quite that way. A healthy, functioning ecosystem stores carbon. Hang on one second. Let's put a pin in that for one moment. When you and I talked to get ready, you put this so well, and I just want to pop out what you said to me. You said, we're seeing a lot of unexpected events this year and every year in terms of weather and climate. And those unexpected events are exactly what the scientists told us to expect. And so I loved that framing, which is, yes, just in the first 6 or 7 months of this year, we've had 10 things happen which are unprecedented or extremely rare and also damaging, and for which we feel unprepared. They're telling people in California to reduce their water use by 15%, and the summer has just barely begun. And we were told to expect the unexpected, to get ready. And one of the things that reminds us is the science on climate change isn't actually under debate, and the science is proving itself to be right in the basics and in fact in some of the details. This is what's happening from the Texas storms to the winter storms to the low levels of the Colorado River that may not be drought but sort of aridification. What we were told was going to happen is happening. And so I think it's important to note that. Tell me, the Council on Environmental Quality is one of those things, the CEQ, you occasionally hear about. It's hard to know where it fits. The federal government has an Environmental Protection Administration, the Department of the Interior, NOAA, the National Weather Service, even the Pentagon, deeply involved in water issues and climate issues. Where does the CEQ, where does the Council on Environmental Quality fit among all those other efforts to tackle environmental issues?
Thanks for asking that, Charles, because I admit myself, when I was growing up, I had never heard of the Council on Environmental Quality, and it wasn't actually until I came up to DC to work in federal environmental policy that I learned of its existence and its role. And I will say that when CEQ is functioning at its best, you probably shouldn't know about it.
Invisible.
Right. Because the purpose of CEQ is to fill gaps and avoid unnecessary duplication and drive good policy forward across the government in a coordinated manner. And so when that happens, people should be able to take for granted, my air is getting cleaner, my water is getting cleaner, I've got abundant wildlife, don't know why it's happening, but it's happening for me.
Well, or the CEQ helps the agencies that actually have the authority and the responsibility for making those things happen. The CEQ helps them work together, because you don't want Interior pulling one way, EPA pulling another way, and a whole set of military bases in Florida or Arizona pulling in a different direction. And also make sure that if there are researchers at EPA and researchers at NOAA working on the same thing, that they at least know about each other. And that kind of, with such a big government and such a big challenge, that kind of coordination function is really, really important, I assume.
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example of how all of those different agencies need to pull in the same direction. So if you think about Department of Defense, you can think about their military bases as having an environmental impact, but you can also think about the fact that they're one of the largest procurers in the United States. And so if you want to drive policy based on the power of the purse, good environmental policy based on the power of the purse, you've got to have Department of Defense as part of the conversation.
You've got to have them purchasing with whatever their $750 billion budget, however much of that is devoted to purchasing, a quarter, a third, a half. You want to be able to aim that purchasing at improving the environmental situation, even as you're buying whatever routine material, not to mention weapons, goes forward. That's what you're talking about.
Correct. And then the other dynamic you want to think about with DoD is, for our own military readiness, you want to be able to test and train the things you're going to need in overseas environments, right? And so you need large areas of space where you're not going to have conflicts with that testing and training. And those large areas of space can be compatible with wildlife habitat, places to improve water quality, and places to improve air quality. And so the things that you wouldn't normally think about when you think about DoD in the environmental context
can actually be very beneficial to both sets of goals. Give us the 60-second version of your job. When you sit in meetings, what is the role of Sara Gonzalez-Rothi in that meeting? What are you trying to make sure people are doing?
Right. So I think the biggest thing is to listen and find where there are gaps or holes in federal policy on an issue, or where there's unnecessary duplication or a lack of conversation. And so I always try to ask myself, is there someone else who needs to be in this meeting at this moment who's not here and wasn't invited? And that's the threshold question for me, because if that person isn't in the room, then we're missing part of the dialogue.
Well, and I guess the point is, you go to lots of different meetings, and the people in those meetings don't go to meetings with other people. So you're the person who can say, wait a minute, yesterday at 10 a.m., a week ago at 2:30, and today at 3, those people need to know how to connect with each other.
Exactly. Shuttle diplomacy.
Shuttle diplomacy in your own government. What's the attitude? What's the current? Are people listening to what you want them to think about in terms of water? I mean, you're not giving orders. We introduced you as the water czar, but you don't actually get to tell anybody what to do. And then in the backdrop, you do have what's going on every week in the country. Is there water awareness inside the government where we want there to be water awareness?
Absolutely. So what I can tell you is, having been the child of 2 career federal scientists, the people who know water science and management the best are those who have been doing it for decades. And so while I can come in and problem solve and triangulate with fresh ears what I'm hearing, those folks, those career folks, they're the experts, and listening to them and elevating what they see is how we're going to solve these problems. And is there an excitement about water policy and water awareness? Absolutely. In fact, there's a strong desire, I have found, to put our shoulders to the wheel, do the right thing, fill the gaps, and move forward in a real way on addressing the climate crisis and addressing environmental justice. Those two priorities both line up squarely with the water work.
Well, it's interesting because you've been in this world for whatever, 15 years. If you go back 20 years, 30 years, water people tend to not want to be on stage. They want to do their jobs quietly and brilliantly and have the water system work the way we're kind of used to it working. No one thinks about where the water pipes are or the sewer pipes are. Very few people know where any water treatment plants in their community are. They just want to turn the water on and have it work. And the water community has always taken pride in that. But right now, water is kind of center stage because of what's happening, both with the water system and the pressure on it and the broader, climate crisis, because water, as you said, either in places you didn't expect it or not showing up where you need it, water is intruding into daily life. And what you're saying is the people who make water policy are happy isn't the right word, but they welcome the chance to be at the center of the conversation and get this stuff fixed.
Absolutely. They feel acknowledged and they feel that their work is important because it is. And right on cue, the water system is giving me some precipitation here. So you probably hear it.
It's raining. It's raining where you are.
It is raining.
Good. That's good news. You said one of the goals of the CEQ is to fill gaps. Tell us the story of the gap in weather and climate forecasting, what that gap means and how it might be fixed.
Yeah. So I mentioned I have a 4-month-old, which means that I started this job, was here for a month to kind of get my admin stuff worked out, and then went on parental leave for 3 months. And I'm just returning to the council, been back about 6 weeks. And so the stories of gaps that I can tell most readily are those from my previous job in the Senate. And the one that I've come up with two, Charles, but the one that comes to mind that we've discussed is that there are line offices within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And most of the general public is most familiar with the National Weather Service. That's the line office that comes to mind when they think of NOAA.
Right. Line office is a term of art in government that means kind of a sub-agency. We think of the National Weather Service as a place. It's part of NOAA, which is part of the Department of Commerce. But okay, so yes.
Correct. And a sister or brother agency, a sibling agency to the National Weather Service is called the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And so you can imagine research activities are those that haven't yet been operationalized or fully vetted, whereas National Weather Service is issuing what are called operational weather forecasts that you
things people can rely on, right?
Because they've been tested. So National Weather Service issues operational forecasts that are really pretty good on what's called a weather time scale, and a weather time scale is up to 14 days out. So you have a pretty good idea that next Tuesday it's going to rain. May not know what time of day it's going to rain. You may not know how many inches you're likely to get, but we have a pretty good idea that next Tuesday we're going to get some rain. That's about a 14-day time scale. Office of Oceanic and
Just to pause a minute, those forecasts are actually really good. Better at 3 days than 10 days, better at 10 days than 14 days. But I know they measure this very carefully, 100% better than they were 20 years ago. The 7-day forecast is as good as the 3-day forecast used to be, and so forth. Those are really good.
Correct. And so as a person that's making decisions 14 days out in advance, you can rely on those to some extent, right? If you're planning to have a bunch of outdoor events and the National Weather Service says next week we're going to get dumped on, you may want to put up a tent, right? Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research does climate models. And the climate models are pretty good down to the time scale of about 2 years. So they can tell you, in about 2 years, you're going to have an El Nino year and you're likely to get a lot of moisture in this region. They can't tell you what month that moisture is coming. They can't tell you, you should plant your crops early, because that 2 week to 2 year window is when a lot of those kinds of decisions are made. How much salt should a county buy in anticipation of snow season this year, for example? And so if you were able to improve that gap between the 2 week weather forecast and the 2 year climate time scale, you could really, make significant improvements for people and businesses.
Right. Wouldn't it be nice to know, we're talking in July, wouldn't it actually be nice to know what's going to happen in November and December and January or a year from now? And what you're saying is we have good visibility in the big picture starting at 2 years, and we have really good visibility out to 2 weeks. And then there's this middle zone, which is in some ways as important as anything else, right? For long-term planning, for farmers, for government agencies, for companies. And so go ahead. What can be done about that?
And so the academic community recognized this gap, and my counterparts at the time in the Senate said, hey, we've got this issue and we're not going to be the main face of climate change progress, but we do need to take care of our farmers here in the home state of Senator Thune, who works on behalf of South Dakotans. And this is a time scale that's important to them. So let's work on legislation that helps the National Weather Service and the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research work together to close that gap between the weather and climate timescale and between the research forecasts and the operational forecasts. And we were successful in putting together language that allows NOAA to have that exchange between the line offices.
So people are working on that, in part directed by Congress. Can you solve this problem? And it wasn't just an important gap, it was a kind of institutional gap. Well, it would be nice to have that, but I predict the weather for next Thursday. That's not my job. And it would be nice to have that, but I do climate models people can rely on for 2 to 10 years. And so that's kind of really important. Okay, hold on. I'm beginning to worry about time. Okay. I want you to pause a minute. I know there's a very funny story, which I'm not going to let you tell, about how you took the LSAT because your maternal grandmother offered to pay for the test if you would take it alongside the GRE. She said, you've always been argumentative. Although I will say you don't seem that argumentative today. And you ended up at the University of Miami Law School, but you came from a healthcare family. Not only your parents, but your sister was getting a PhD in a healthcare science division at UM. Tell us how you came to be thinking about the environment not as something you did outside of school or work, but as the centerpiece of work, because I think it's a really important story for people to remember as we need more people like you in the world. What happened? How did you get involved?
Sure. So like most kids in Gainesville, Florida, I was outside all day, all night. I was dirty all the time.
Good for you.
And my bathing was in the springs. I had those sort of Florida summer kid baths. But I never in a million years imagined that environmental policy could be a career. I like to talk a lot. I have strong opinions, and I love to be outside. And that's basically what my job nowadays is. But
all those White House meetings are actually conducted out on the lawn. If only.
Well, at least we get to talk about these beautiful places.
Right.
So when I went to law school, I thought, I was deciding between getting a master's in public health and going to law school, and hence the story about my grandmother having me take the LSAT. And I thought, well, I'll go to law school because that doesn't foreclose me going into public health later. Well, I took a health policy class, and it wasn't really it didn't bite me, didn't catch my interest so much. But I was also,
what you said about what the health policy class was about.
it turns out health policy is all about insurance and not really much about health. So I thought, well, this is not what I'm interested in. My family are all physicians, and I want to talk about how to help people. Well, so I started taking admiralty law classes, which deals with liability when things are happening at sea. And I got to the end of those admiralty law classes, and my professor said to me, you've taken all the admiralty law classes, but you're really interested in the marine environment issues, and I think you should take marine environmental law. At the same time, my now husband, who was then we were just dating, and he was in law school with me, said, you've got to take this woman, Mary Doyle's class on environmental policy. You love the environment. You spend so much time out there. Why don't you just take this environmental law class? So I took it. And I also took the marine environmental law class at the same time. And
Mary Doyle, just to pause, wasn't just a law professor at She'd been an assistant secretary of the Interior. She has passed away now, but she's a legendary figure in environmental policy in Florida and also in Washington.
Correct. So I took Mary Doyle's class, and she had taught my now husband his property law class, and that's why he felt that I needed to take her course. And I took her class, and she brought several folks in from Washington, D.C. to talk about their jobs in environmental law and policy. And I thought, wow, I didn't even know that this was an option, but what a cool thing, and what a cool way to try to use my law degree. And she encouraged me, even as I was interviewing with, guess what, insurance defense firms and other civil litigation firms, she encouraged me to apply for an Everglades Foundation fellowship. And so I did. And I got that inaugural fellowship. The good news was that I was awarded the fellowship. The bad news was they were going to split it with another student and not provide health insurance. So I called my parents and said, great news, I got the fellowship. Bad news, I have to decline because who's going to pay for my health insurance? And fortunately, they were able to, this was before Affordable Care Act, it's not that I couldn't stay on their health insurance, but they were able to help me so that I could take the fellowship.
And so, hey, let's just pause a moment. Mary Doyle, you took that class, you loved the world of the outdoors and thinking about that and understanding that. You had been to college, you had graduated from the University of Florida, you had gotten into law school, the University of Miami, done so well that you were getting a free ride from them, full scholarship, and yet you didn't understand, and you're the daughter of two research scientists, you didn't quite understand that there was a world of environmental policy that someone like you could make a profession out of. And there you are in law school in Mary Doyle's class, and she's bringing guest speakers in who do this stuff for a living, who have law degrees. I'm a lawyer for the Department of the Interior. I'm a lawyer for EPA. I'm a lawyer for this NGO. And that was sort of when the gap closed for you, when the sort of switch clicked. Oh, I could do what they do. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And so to me, we need, climate change needs talent. Water needs talent. It's not the fusty old world it was in 1977. And so I think that's a really important point to make. Okay, we are definitely, unfortunately, running out of both your time and our time. I think I want to ask you two final questions. First, everyone in the world of climate change, and especially in the world of water, if you think about flooding, if you think about saltwater intrusion, if you think about managing water supplies that are changing, there are defensive responses. We have to protect the subway system of New York City. We have to prevent the Norfolk Naval Base from flooding. and there are these creative, sort of slightly farther looking responses. How do we adapt Charleston, South Carolina to live with sea level rise and to retain everything that's, you know, interesting, fun, creative, appealing about modern Charleston? And there's a tension between the defensive response and the creative, reorganize the economy to power through climate change in an effective and a sort of growth mode. How do you balance? How do we balance? The people in the audience are doing this every day, the defensive response against the creative response.
You have to do both, because we do have to manage the crisis of the moment. But if we only manage for the crisis of the moment, then there's going to be more of those momentary crises is what we're learning, right? And I had this seminal moment, must have been 2013 or 2014, when I was attending the Gilbert White Flood Policy Forum. And there was this woman speaking there. Her name is Denise Reed. And she was at the Army Corps of Engineers at the time. She's now, I believe, at the Water Institute of the Gulf, or maybe somewhere else. But she was talking about how do you make these trade-offs and decisions of, do I focus on 10 years from now, or do I focus on this year's issue? And she talked about an analysis you could do, which was interesting to me as an anthropology major in undergrad, where you had to look at what are water dependent. So for example, is there an industry that is actually dependent on the water? The marine transportation system, maybe. And are there elements of a community that is vulnerable that need to be physically proximal to the water? And are there elements of that community which don't need to be physically proximal to the water? And so as you think about, are we going to build a levee and try to physically keep the floodwaters out? Or are we going to move our drinking water well inland from the saltwater intrusion plume? You also need to be thinking about, are there things we can do to adapt this community such that the continued impacts of climate change we are going to see aren't going to add insult to injury? And so I think that's kind of the calculus that the federal agencies, the states, the localities, the tribes are doing on a daily basis. What are the elements of this lifestyle that need to remain close to the water, and what are those that don't?
And of course, when you're planning, we have a session this year on infrastructure impacts specifically from water-related climate change, and some of that is obviously crisis management, but the folks in New York City are building whole new standards. When you build something new, you have to plan differently than you planned 10 years ago. So all those levels of government and companies too do long-range planning. And so part of what you're saying is, as you're thinking about 2 years from now and 5 years from now and 10 years from now, which you always do, make sure you think in real terms about climate and water impacts, not in terms of how you might have accounted for it 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go out with this question. If we do it right in the next 10 years, if we begin this adaptation process in 2031 and 2041, those years are not that far away. In fact, we are as close to 2041, Lord help us, as we are to the events of 9/11, right? What will our relationship to water look like, and what will our water system look like? How will the world look different if we do the next 10 years and the next 20 years of resilience and adaptation right?
Well, let me tell you what's not going to change. What's not going to change is that we as humans will continue to need clean, fresh, abundant water to survive. It's in our blood. And so if we do everything right, then we will have ensured that that's even a possibility. Because if we fail or if we delay, the consequences are really grave. So I think, it's easy to think I could get discouraged when I look at climate change and the enormity of it. but I'm actually hopeful, because the truth is that the businesses you're talking about are the ones that are going to lead on innovation and say, here's how we use water in a more effective and efficient way to address the climate change challenges of the future.
And what makes you optimistic? Why are you optimistic, since you think about this every hour of every day?
Because look, I mean, the climate crisis is something that began in the Industrial Revolution. And when you think about geologic time, that's not really that long, Charles. And we made such a significant impact on the climate in that short of a period of time that I'm confident that if people of goodwill get together and say, this is the problem, and we're going to all put our shoulders to the same wheel to turn it around, that we can do that.
Right. We're the ones unintentionally who made the impact in the last, whatever, 130 years, 140 years. What you're saying is, if we're intentional about fixing it, we pull together in the same direction, we should be able to have as dramatic an impact intentionally as we had unintentionally.
Absolutely. And I think that means being clear-eyed about the science and not putting our heads in the sand, but saying, this is where we are, this is how we got here, and now this how we're going to get our way out of it.
Okay, I love that. I'd never quite heard it put that way. That is a great note to go out on. Sara Gonzalez-Rothi, thank you so much for taking 2 of your 30-minute time increments to talk to us today. And we so appreciate it. And we appreciate you keeping water at the center of the conversation there in the Biden White House.
Thank you, Charles.
Well, good morning again, and welcome back live. I am Charles Fishman. We've got Emilio Tenuta from Ecolab and Claudia Toussaint from Xylem to round out and expand this conversation. Let me first give you a few words about each of them. Emilio may be a familiar face. He is with us on a panel for the 3rd time at the Water Summit. And both Emilio and Claudia have really interesting backgrounds. Emilio right now is Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Ecolab. But as I did with Sara Gonzalez-Rothi, if we go all the way back, Emilio is a first-generation Italian-American immigrant. And as a child, he used to go back to southern Italy and visit his relatives who were still living there, who were small farmers and who had to collect rainwater and manage it to grow, as he told me, tomatoes and peppers and keep their orchards watered. So he has a really interesting experience there. Ecolab now has 3 million customer locations. Few of them are orchards in southern Italy, but that's in him. And Claudia Toussaint grew up in Germany. And we had a nice, fascinating conversation about how the attitude about water in Germany is much different than it is in the United States. In the US, the attitude about water is really all but non-existent. We don't think about our water. That's because we have such a great water system. And Claudia said she was really raised in an environment where water was noticed and appreciated. It was utility water in Germany is much more expensive than routine utility water for a home here. She came to the U.S. to go to school, and we managed to hold on to her. She got undergraduate and graduate degrees at UCLA, and both Emilio and Claudia eventually, on their own paths, went looking for a job that involved environmental impact and water in some way. First, let's ask you guys to react a little bit to Sara. I thought she made a lot of points, but 2 that struck me were, first, she said, people in the world of water are experiencing a dramatic increase in the kinds of problems they face. And many of those problems are the result of immediate crises, and the crises are caused by climate change. And on the flip side, climate change is causing problems across the spectrum. We're experiencing that this year and especially this summer, every day, everywhere you look. And a lot of those problems are water problems. So the water problems and the climate problems are overlapping and kind of magnifying each other. And the other thing she said that I thought was powerful that we didn't really dig in on was the market really matters. She talked about the spending power of the Pentagon, and are we using the money that the Pentagon spends every day of every year purchasing things in a smart way in terms of water and climate change? Are we creating a more sustainable economy by the choices we make? You all, of course, live in that world every day, the world of people making choices in the capitalist economy. Emilio, tell us what struck you about Sara before we jump further into your own worlds.
Hey, thanks, Charles. And Claudia, it's great to be with you on the panel. And hello, everyone. So, Charles, I got to tell you that there's a lot of things. I've got stream of thoughts from Sara's opening remarks. And, one was identifying the gaps or holes in environmental water policy, which is something that her role is designed to help resource and address, which sounds great. But the challenge is to date, when it comes to environmental and climate policy, it feels reactive rather than proactive, right? Which is coming out, as we come out of a health crisis, we know the disruptive nature of these unplanned events, right? And so water is
and of not being ready, of not thinking ahead, right?
So water is at the center of the climate challenge, as you pointed out, and she's rightfully stated that quality, quantity, she said distribution and timing are the right elements to think about to connect water and climate impacts, not only for communities, but also for businesses, right? So having healthy, functioning ecosystems, which is the way she put it, is being recognized by companies today over the past 2 years. And so from Sara's point that there's momentum, but more work needs to be done. As you know, water and climate strategies are linked, but we need to implement smart water management because we know that can help reduce energy use, which in turn reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And the best of all, for private sector companies, it reduces costs. So there's a business case there. But as Congress deliberates about how to steer infrastructure investments to reduce environmental impacts, we should keep in mind the role that not only water efficiency and reuse and reclaim and recycle has, and the infrastructure needed to support it can play. So federal investment in infrastructure offers significant opportunities to address these challenges proactively for businesses and communities. And some of the things that, I think we need to think about, and I know we'll talk about, is things like water recycling infrastructure, purple pipe strategies that allow us to use gray water where it's fit for use. Another one would be incentives for water efficiency and reuse. Another one, which wasn't talked about, is broadband. I know we'll get into the importance of digitizing water, but how digital solutions can really enhance the way businesses manage water to drive not only efficiency, but emissions reduction. So those are just some of the thoughts that come to mind.
Okay, hang on one second. Claudia, I didn't really properly introduce you, and I apologize for that. I discussed your childhood without saying who you are. Claudia,
no worries. My childhood had huge influence of who I am, okay?
As opposed to those of us for whom childhood was irrelevant. Claudia Toussaint is a senior vice president at Xylem, which is a well-known major water infrastructure company. Senior vice president, chief sustainability officer, general counsel, and right now she is interim chief human resources officer. So if you want to sue Xylem, if you want to help them with their sustainability efforts, or if you simply want to go to work for Claudia, she is the person to see. Claudia, what's your immediate reaction to what you heard from Sara?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Sara made incredibly important points, right? I really think that this is water's moment. And Emilio touched on a number of things from industrial water users' perspective. I think there is also a really important player within our sector here, and those are the, water utilities and water system operators. And what we are seeing is them adopting new innovation and new technologies to help manage water more resourcefully and more responsibly. And the reason that is so important is that when we think about the fact that today billions of people live and businesses operate in water scarce and water stressed regions, and that if we don't apply new approaches to managing water and water stewardship, by 2030, there will be a 40% gap between water supply and water demand. So I think, the opportunity that we have is to really have policy, investment, and technology come together to reshape how we manage water. And there's a huge opportunity for the users of water, and there's a huge opportunity for the utilities and community providers of water.
Okay, Claudia, let's stay with you for a minute. You're making a good point, although you're making the positive version. The flip side, of course, is if we don't do it right, we're going to have disaster. You used a phrase in our conversation that you didn't just use just now, which is infrastructure modernization, and I think what you just set up was perfect. This is an opportunity, but we also in some ways have no choice. What do you think of as infrastructure modernization? What does that phrase mean to you?
So it means lots of things, but I think at the core is the use of digital technology to really help modernize and use our aging infrastructure at a lower cost, with greater energy efficiency and with greater cost efficiencies. And the ability of us to use and have access to data analytics and to digital tools today just didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. And there's a huge opportunity for modernizing our water infrastructure to provide environmental and social benefits to communities at a much lower cost than previously.
Okay, I'm gonna flip back to you in a minute, Emilio. But traditionally, the water world has been a little reluctant to quote unquote modernize itself.
Yes.
And so I'm curious. It's nice to talk about modernizing infrastructure, but what's the attitude? Are you guys at Xylem encouraging people to do this, or are people coming to you and saying, we need you to do this?
It's a little bit of both. And I think there's a real opportunity with the water infrastructure bill to provide, funding for new technologies. And maybe, Charles, the best way to illustrate it is to give a couple of examples of what we're seeing in terms of the application of digital technologies in this space. So if I think of a city that we've worked with, the city of South Bend in Indiana, they have really optimized their existing gray wastewater network by using artificial intelligence, in essence, a smart, sensor-equipped sewer network, and been able to reduce their sewer overflows, by over 80%, with far less investment dollars than that would be needed if you had put in traditional expansions of gray infrastructure. And that's the opportunity that I see when I talk about modernizing the water infrastructure, that you enable communities to have solutions at a lower cost, greater speed, and for value previously couldn't deliver.
Okay, and I think people can appreciate that, which is if you have a good sensor network, if you have good computer, if you have good data analysis, you can actually, what you're talking about is using the pipes and the pumps and the treatment plant that you've already got in a more effective way. Just give us briefly a sense of, was South Bend excited about this prospect or dubious about it? I think in a lot of places, every single corner of the American economy has been revolutionized by digital technology, except water. Like Walmart's long haul trucks have much more digital technology and transparency than the average municipal water system. So did South Bend say, this is cool? Or did South Bend say, what if you screw up my sewer system? Who am I gonna call?
Well, and that's the challenge, right? And I think that what we're seeing are two things. Number one, the impacts and velocity of climate change is making these changes more urgent. And the financial situations of municipalities is making the municipalities more open to looking at more economic solutions. The other piece is in this industry, as you know, being able to look to somebody that has done it successfully and have a reference and a peer to talk to has enormous influence and support, because our utilities, they don't want to mess up their clean water or wastewater networks because they have such a stewardship obligation towards their communities.
Okay, good. There was a lot there, but not the least of which is there's nothing like a crisis to bring clarity to a community's choices. Okay. Interestingly, Emilio, you and Ecolab operate in a different space.
Right.
We didn't say this, but half of Xylem's revenue comes from water utilities. We need them to work well for everybody else as a foundation. But Emilio, you work with companies essentially, and you guys use this phrase called digitizing water, which Claudia, you're not permitted to steal, I don't think. But it's not an unrelated idea just in the private sector arena. What does digitizing water mean, and what does it do?
Sure. So digital, or what I like to refer to as smart water, enables us to prevent, anticipate, and solve problems before they happen. In simple terms, right? By collecting and analyzing large amounts of real-time water-related data based on critical water circuits within an operation, let's say a automotive assembly plant. So at Ecolab, our systems enable organizations like an automotive assembly plant to identify, correlations and trends and be able to forecast problems and optimally, deploy resources to address it, whether it be through machine learning or through, direct interaction by local engineers. So we have at Ecolab Digital Water and Energy Solutions. We develop these solutions. We have an innovative digital cloud-based platform called Ecolab 3D. It provides, diagnostic and predictive insights and controls for unit operations in industrial manufacturing plants. In some applications, we provide predictive and prescriptive automation. For example, managing, we've been talking about water quality today. Water chemistry in a local basin is obviously vital to controlling the amount of fresh water you use. So managing that water chemistry is a great example of, becoming more predictive based on the variability of that water quality in the basin, because it's never static, it's always dynamic. So to control and minimize the fouling from corrosion and scale that may foul up an automotive welding system, like a critical cooling system in a power plant, that is how you would use this technology to really drive that type of analytics and proactive management. So one of the things, Charles, that we just launched is I think a big real innovation because of the gap that we see in the market, which is the latest measurement and one of the biggest gaps we see around metering and sub-metering water within an industrial operation. And there's a technology we refer to as water flow intelligence that's designed to help industry address their water use challenges in a given location, whether it be California, which is going through a mega drought, or in Taiwan, which they've been dealing with their water challenges. And so the part of this that's interesting is that industrial water, for the most part, has been managed manually at its site level with very little visibility, impacting their water use and the potential for significant operational risks that they face because of the changes in water quality and quantity. And so this enables facilities to combine smart water meters and sensors with advanced water flow measurement and monitor that water flow in their critical water circuits, and really come up with the opportunity to see the changes 24/7 in real time across not only a unit operation, but across the manufacturing plant, which is critical, but not only for the plant, but also to the enterprise, for those that are multinationals. They need to see, how water is being managed across multiple sites in multiple regions. So I wanted you to be aware that is kind of the direction we're heading when it comes to this concept of digitizing water.
Okay, hold on one second. I just want to underscore for a minute what you said. If you live in the world of water, it can be hard to appreciate how little water intrudes into the daily life of many huge organizations that pay very careful attention to their HR costs, their hiring costs, their health insurance costs, their electricity use. We had, I think 3 years ago, the chief of sustainability for Ford. Ford went on this huge campaign to reduce its water use. Ford has manufacturing operations in something like 67 countries. The first thing Ford did was ask every Ford facility to report its monthly water use. And most Ford facilities had no water meters, let alone sub-meters for paint versus fire protection versus in-house use. And so in order to measure water use, they had to purchase the quote unquote measuring tools. And that took them on this incredible journey where Ford now uses literally to make a car less than half the amount of water that it used 20 years ago. But what you're talking about is, and I actually had the same experience at an Intel microchip factory. I'm sorry, an IBM microchip factory, where they wanted to reduce their water use, and the first thing they had to do was deploy a sensor network and say, well, we don't even know how we use water, so let's understand that first. You're saying the same thing. If you want to manage your water use, the first thing you have to do is measure it. Tell us the story of digital realty, because there's so many things about that story that I like, starting with the fact that we don't really associate the internet with water, but as we talked about when we talk, every time you press enter on a Google search, 2 tablespoons of water are used to do that Google search. The next time you press enter on a Google search, even if it's 6 seconds later, 2 more tablespoons of water are used to do that. So tell us about the Ecolab customer digital realty and what their problem was and what these digital tools did for them.
Absolutely. And I'm going to set that up, Charles, with this quick survey, because I think I just want to underscore the point you made about digital tools. In March of this year, on World Water Day, we launched a Green Biz survey that we did with Green Biz, a sustainability research firm that conducts surveys and does a number of other great creative things. But we wanted to learn more about the state of corporate water management and how companies can more effectively advance their water management goals, right? So that was the impetus for it. And in March, we heard from 93 companies with $1 billion or more in annual revenue. And here's what we found out, just to set up Digital Realty. 65% of the respondents stated that corporate water teams are responsible for setting their water goals at an organizational level. However, 95% of them responded that operations and facilities were responsible for achieving water targets, to your point about Ford. And get this, nearly half, or 45% of the respondents, feel that water would be better managed and targets more easily achieved if they had enhanced water measurement and management tools in their operations. So I just wanted to share that while water goals, which are being set at the corporate level every day, right, progress needs to happen at the facility level. In most cases, they don't have the digital tools and measurement to get it done at the local level. Now, let me set up. So that's a setup for Digital Realty. And
right. They don't, you can't, I mean, that's the silly cliche. You can't manage what you don't measure, but
exactly,
water has essentially been free and not something you needed to think about for 30 years or 70 years. And so if the boss says, how much water do we use, as the CEO of Ford did, the answer is, we don't know, boss, and we don't care. Right up to the moment that you really must care, of course.
Right, exactly. So let's take a look at an example that really helps bring this to life. Digital Realty, as Charles pointed out, is an on-demand cloud service provider and partner to tech companies for their needs related to co-located cloud services to support their consumers. So think about tech companies like Microsoft, Google, Facebook. They require server capacity to support their cloud programs. They would call Digital Realty to help them with that demand. And so Ecolab, what are we doing in this situation? So as Charles pointed out, the growth of the cloud, right? We all have smartphones. And when you think of the cloud, it means hard infrastructure. Throughout the world, there are these thousands of data centers that do all this number crunching that powers the online services on our phone. And a data center is essentially a building full of computers and servers. And these servers generate a lot of heat, and they have to be cooled. And that cooling takes water. In fact, about 90+% of the water going into a data center is actually going to cool the servers. And that's where Ecolab comes in. And so in 2019, we helped Digital Realty with a water risk assessment that entailed leveraging a digital public tool referred to as a Smart Water Navigator, and it's available. We launched an update to that tool in March of 2021, so just this year. And the latest and most advanced tool that we launched is really focused on helping organizations around the world implement their smart water journey based on local water issues and challenges. So for Digital Realty, the aim was to implement a water stewardship strategy across over 60 of their mission critical data centers. The last thing a data center manager wants to hear is that their cloud goes down, right? I mean, reliability is utmost importance. And so expanding their water conservation efforts was not only to optimize freshwater use through reduction, reuse, and recycle projects, but it's also really designed to ensure uptime, right? To make sure that they don't go down and have an issue related to water or energy that brings that server down. So with an eye toward that strategy, we designed and helped them really develop a program around their critical cooling systems that achieve the balance of water consumption, energy efficiency, as well as environmental impacts. And the effort was really designed around enhancing their water resiliency by leveraging smart technology, like some of the technologies we talked about earlier, 3D tracer technology, which enables us to take not only fresh water, but different quality of water through smart sensors and be able to monitor in real time that water variability. So as Claudia talked about, the more we start to get gray infrastructure, the more we can adopt these practices in these critical operations, like in a data center, to really use gray water through innovative smart water solutions like 3D tracer to begin to reduce their dependency on fresh water use. And so in places like California, Texas, Taiwan, this is where we are focused on helping industry really adapt, right? Not only mitigate the risk, but adapt to the changing world that they live in, given the water conditions in that local area.
Okay. Claudia, you and Xylem are out there every day talking to both utilities and commercial customers. You even mentioned thinking about the customers of your customers, which I really like, a step beyond. Are people, the South Bend example, where you all help them deploy sensors and manage their existing infrastructure better, that's sort of to me, that strikes me as a midterm kind of solution, right? It's not building a brand new modern system, which would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's not shrugging and saying, sewer overflows are the way life works. Are people looking for crisis-oriented, get us through the next 2 years solutions, or are they actually imagining the 10 and 20 and 40-year solution, which might require a different kind of investment, but will really change the game going forward?
So I would say both, because, and here I come back to, what Sara said, right? You have to manage the crisis in the short term and, for the longer term. And so I think that from the opportunity that we have to build resiliency in communities, I think we're seeing customers look at very different tools than they did 10 years ago, from both a digital perspective and on the utility side. Charles, what we're seeing is the combination of these digital tools with existing infrastructure that is in the ground, optimizing that infrastructure and enabling, and this is why we look to the customers of our customers, different kind of demand management by the utilities, residential and industrial customers. And this is where solutions that Emilio talked about, come in, and where kind of the circle gets closed.
Okay, but what does that mean? How do I use these digital tools for demand management? Demand management meaning I'm literally encouraging people to use less water?
Encouraging people to use less water, encouraging people to actually have much more accurate measurements of their water. So to know when you have a leak in your water system, because the way water is metered now through, for example, advanced metering infrastructure, gives both the utility as well as the utility's customer an opportunity to see where are leaks in the system and to provide notification and to dispatch staff and
quickly, right?
Much greater efficiency
and with precision, right? I'm curious. You yourself said it's good to have examples so that if the water system in Tulsa or the water system in Orlando is considering a digital leap, you can say, come visit South Bend and see what they're up to. It does require a different kind of mindset. And one of the things I was so struck by as I made the point was that Sara Gonzalez-Rothi, who's become such a valuable figure in the world of water, kind of stumbled in accidentally, right? She was looking for this world her whole life, but didn't even know you could make a job out of it. People, of course, use digital tools even water system, the overnight water system operator in Louisville absolutely has a computer and a smartphone at home, at work. So there's a kind of an acclimatization there. And then there's this larger acclimatization. How do we get, I mean, we actually did a session last year on machine learning and artificial intelligence in the water sector, and how resistant is too strong a term. Water just hasn't even been interested. Like, whatever. Yeah, those are those crazy computer people. I run a water system. And when you talk to the people who do this kind of sophisticated computer work, there's so much that water can benefit. I'm curious whether you've, and this is really for both of you, but let's start with you, Claudia. Is there a shift in attitude? Do people say, I know what tools are available, can you bring those to bear for us?
I think crisis or restraint is often the mother of invention, right? And we find courage because the crisis is so much more severe today than it was, 5 years ago. And
we find courage or panic. They kind of look the same.
I like to think of it as courage, And the other thing, Charles, I would say is, you are seeing more and more, because water is being elevated in the global conversation, and the nexus, I think, to climate change is so much, and public health is so much clearer today than it was, a number of years ago. You are seeing people coming into the sector that are much more digital natives, and I think we will obviously see that accelerate. And we will, I am confident, as a result of that, see greater adoption of digital technologies within the sector. And I think the opportunity for cost efficiencies and managing the carbon footprint of utilities as a result of the deployment of these types of technologies is tremendous. And I think the utilities are seeing the opportunity, and the communities are asking their utilities, what are you doing to manage, the community and the carbon footprint of your operations? That is a dialogue that didn't exist a number of years ago.
Okay, so you're seeing that change. I just want to encourage people to ask questions. We're going to start taking questions right after Emilio gives us his sense of, again, digital realty. I would guess there's folks in that company. They manage computers and data, and they manage their own data about the data, right? That's their ability to serve their customers is reliant on understanding what's going on at every minute. So if you said to them, we can do this with water, they would have said, okay, we can understand that. In more traditional industries, in less sort of digitally focused industries, Emilio, do people get it? What's the education? Like, are they coming to you, or are you coming to them? We take care of these other things for you. We could really help you over here. Let us show you how. What's the recognition process like?
Well, I think if anything, over the last 24 months, Charles, the word that was used by Sara was dependency. There's more of an appreciation over the last 24 months coming out of the pandemic, and the fact that companies, large brands, big brands, multinationals, are aware of the ability to weather the storm requires them to become more proactive around issues related to climate, and appreciating the fact that water is part of that climate solution. And that's something that's not been really given its just due in the past. I think the point about dependency is that more than ever, I can't think of an industry, by the way, where water is not a dependency, right? So it becomes really challenging for companies to really to manage their risk factors, which they typically, what we've seen is they're managing really 3 risk factors. Physical risk, like you mentioned, the mega droughts we're experiencing in the West and other parts like Sao Paulo and Taiwan. 2, regulatory risk, and then 3, reputational risk. And so for companies like Digital Realty or Microsoft or Facebook, those are real risks that they're managing, given that water is such a high dependency to them. And they're putting together proactive water strategies that lead to this concept that you're going to hear more about in the future is net positive water, which is something that more and more companies are doing to really address availability, quality, and access, which are the three, factors that the UN talks about when they talk about water risk, stress, and scarcity.
And what is net positive water?
Well, so based on that definition, if you think about water availability, quality, or access, net positive water impact is simply defined as contributing more as an operation to a basin, a watershed, the health of that watershed, than what's taken from it. So we believe companies both invest, right, in world-class water efficiency practices, and they invest in making measurable improvement in their watersheds in proportion to their local water use and economic impact. And so therefore, looking at this holistically, when you look at a basin, how a operation will actually contribute more to the basin health and the stress that is put on it than is being taken from it, right? And so, three components to that, right? One is adopting water stewardship principles, which is, put in practice to understand the shared water challenges, because there's no two watersheds that are the same, right? And how we'll address those issues with local solutions. So that's number one. Number two, it's adopting solutions that reduce withdrawal demand from whatever that source water is, to improve quality is another one. So it's not only availability, it's also quality, given the local conditions. And then third, which is growing, it's adopting what I'll call nature-based solutions that enables replenishment of water benefits that increase the water supply in the basin. So you're hearing more and more companies adopting these strategies. Coca-Cola, Ecolab, Microsoft, we're all jumping in. We're part of a coalition called the Water Resilience Coalition. Another factor that we're seeing over the last two years is that companies know this is not something you can do alone, and that binding us together to work together in critical watersheds where we all have operations is a smart strategy. You may have heard of the California Water Action Collaborative, or QUAC. You'll never forget it. In Southern California, that strategy is alive and well, and we're trying to adopt that in other critical watersheds where we can all band together to work on net positive water impact.
Right. I mean, that requires a level of consciousness that's a leap beyond a little bit what we've been talking about, right?
Right.
You have to understand your own water use, and net positive water is actually not something you can do inside your office building or office park or factory. It requires drawing the circle around the community and saying, can we contribute to better water management outside the fence line? Okay, let's jump on some questions. We had one question for Sara, which is, given what's going on in the southwestern U.S., does the Council on Environmental Quality deal with the western U.S. and the drought? And just on behalf of Sara, I don't think the CEQ is a crisis management organization. It's not that I don't think they aren't. And their job is really to plug these gaps. And so I would have been curious to ask what she sees out there in the western U.S. that her folks can work on. But this idea, I really actually find very appealing, this idea of trying to get good weather forecasting, good climate forecasting from 2 weeks to 2 years, because here we are in July, and wouldn't it be helpful to know what next spring's rainfall is going to be like roughly across the Great Plains of the U.S., or whether there's going to be these extraordinary heat events in New England next year instead of the Pacific Northwest. And so the ability to forecast that, if it's possible, I think would really help the West. A question about Iran. I don't know whether you guys have been paying attention or not, but kind of extraordinary. Iran is having the worst drought in 50 years on top of the rest of the politics of Iran. For 10 days, there have been protests every night in 30 cities around the country over water availability. Imagine just for a moment that the US was having 2 weeks of protests in 30 big cities about water availability. That would just be, it would be terrible, and it would also be extraordinary. I think most people in the water world are sort of familiar with the thinking that a lot of what happened in Syria in the last 10 years started with mismanagement of drought, farmers coming into the cities, a kind of cascade of problems that started with bad water management and bad food availability management. Each of you take a shot at the sort of, far end of the risk here, and whether you think the people you work with every day understand that. Claudia?
I mean, I would say, the human tragedy of it is just unimaginable, right? And I think that in the water sector, we are all very conscious of the fact that most people are going to experience climate change fundamentally and primarily through water, whether it is, too much water or too little water. And it will result in things like climate refugees. And you referred to Syria, Charles, which was a significant contributor to the refugee crisis in Europe that, Emilio and I both being, of European origin, very much relate to. And so I think it is something that is top of mind of us. It is something why we invest at Xylem in kind of elevating the global conversation on water, and why we believe that collective action between government, industry, and NGOs is so critical to solve these issues.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Claudia. I think you said it very well, is that the problem isn't going away, and if anything, there's a ripple effect from water scarcity conditions that impacts our daily lives in many ways. And what you described in places like Iran and Syria, which I'm very familiar with, are getting worse. So the combined effects of climate change and water shortages can wreak havoc on our food supply, cause political instability like you just described, and even violence. It doesn't take much. And I think collective action, but also going back to our point about being proactive, Charles, where we go after this, because obviously those regions we just talked about are arid regions in the world, right? And we need to think differently. Places like Israel is a great example. Australia, Singapore, those are places where they've been proactive to really managing water stress and water scarcity in a way that has delivered economic prosperity and social good. So I feel that
and created a cushion for them going forward, right? The Israelis live in exactly the same climate as the Iranians. They've spent 30 years saying water's going to be a problem. Water's going to be a problem. Water's going to be a problem. We don't want water to limit economic growth. How do we cope with that? You're right. The Singaporeans as well. Australians had a good 10 years, and they've sort of descended a little bit into chaos. But yeah, you're exactly right. There are examples of people thinking ahead. I feel like the U.S. has had 20 years of warning on the Colorado River water system. Just sort of, it'll rain. It'll rain. It'll rain. And guess what? It's not going to rain. And so I hope we get it. Claudia, let me come back to you, and I think we're going to wrap up, and we'll give you a shot for some last minute remarks as well, Emilio. But I know you're following the infrastructure bill. I feel like, I I live 8 miles from Capitol Hill. I feel like I want to grab those people and shake them. Like, don't just brag about $120 billion in water for the first time and the most water, and we're going to replace your lead service lines. We need 100 years ago, we had really smart municipal and water officials who laid an infrastructure foundation that we use every day right now. Like literally 100 yards from where I'm sitting, Washington, D.C. just dug up and replaced 100-year-old sewers. Those sewers were all gravity. 100 years ago, they were designing them to flow to the water treatment plant by gravity. I really want the infrastructure bill to have the right incentives so that, without being crass, it creates a lot of business for Xylem and Ecolab, right? That we're not building, quote unquote, new versions of 1970s technology. We are reaching forward so that we're getting ready for what's coming. Claudia, do you have a sense that anybody in Washington understands that and is paying attention to it?
So I share your exasperation and despair about where we are in the process. So let me say that. I will tell you that I remain optimistic that there will be provisions that will fund and support emerging technologies, and that will also focus on because water systems in particular are critical infrastructure, and they are subject to cyber risks, that there will be funding to make sure that we protect our water infrastructure, much like our electric infrastructure, from cyber risks. And so I'm optimistic that we will have provisions like that. They will obviously be balanced with traditional provisions in terms of, gray infrastructure replacements when you think of, for example, lead pipes. But I think the fact, as you said, Charles, that virtually every other sector has been digitized, it is the water sector's time to be digitized.
It is, and we need it. We need it to be. Emilio, final thought.
One of the things that you've been hitting on is change coming fast enough? And I would say, no, it's not. And two reasons for that. First, we need to adopt a governing idea. And it's simple. Climate equals water. Water issues are compounded due to climate change, as we talked about today. And we need to go beyond mitigation to solve them. And adaptation strategies exist to, as you heard today from both Claudia and I, that make the most of this finite resources. And the second is, this is amazing to me every time I think about it, that today worldwide we reclaim and reuse only 3% of our wastewater. With the water deficit that the world's going to see by 2030, it requires us to think bigger and more proactively. What if we could double that 3%, maybe even triple it and make it 9%? We can do it. We have the ability to do it. And we talked about some of the strategies and practices that can help us get there.
I so appreciate the optimism on both your accounts. And that's, as ever with water, in fact, we have the tools we need to solve the problem. There are people out there creating new tools. They may represent a breakthrough, but we're not puzzled about how to tackle any particular water problem. The hard part isn't usually the engineering, it's the people. So let's focus on the opportunity as we go forward. All right, Emilio, great to see you again. Claudia, thank you so much for joining us for this session. And I'm gonna toss it back to Dean. We appreciate everybody's patience and being with us this morning.
Thanks very much, Charles. That was a great session with Sara as well as with Claudia and Emilio. I had a number of great takeaways from the comments that I'm going to be using. Claudia talked about everyone is going to experience climate change through water, and Emilio's comments about being more proactive and less reactive. And Charles, the last thing you said in closing is not doing 19th century technology in the 21st century. So very good comments. Thanks to Charles, Emilio, Claudia, and Sarah for a terrific session. We want to close out the day with a video from Century, one of our Brew 2.0 participants. And I would also encourage you to tune back to the rest of the series, the remaining series of our summit tomorrow, as well as Thursday. And on Thursday in particular, you'll hear a company pitch called DiviRod, who actually has an application that is very much tied to this whole idea of climate change that we talked about today. Tomorrow we'll start again at 9 o'clock and on the same signal wire, where we will be talking about lessons from Texas. What did we learn from the situation a few months ago and how we can improve our practices? But for now, let's show the Century Brew 2.0 pitch.
Hi, I'm John Grant, Century's Chief Commercial Officer and best bow tire. We care about the environment and making the world better through smarter decisions in treating water and wastewater. Our best clients experience biological imbalance or toxic shocks and/or want to optimize a process. Smarter decisions in treating water and wastewater are tough because of existing tools for monitoring water quality. Real-time sensors need frequent cleaning or they end up covered in crap, literally. That's because biofilm grows in them and makes it hard to read sensors unless they're cleaned at least once a week. And who likes grab samples that take days to get results and provide almost zero useful information that is actionable? Wastewater conditions change all the time, and current methods can't tell us that because of biofouling. Now, we're taking biofouling and letting it do the work for us. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if a sensor was built to live in nasty wastewater conditions? We did, and developed a biofilm-based sensor with a surface primed to receive respired electrons. We put 2 metal sheets at the end of our probe to monitor the biofilm's response to your changing wastewater conditions. What does that mean? That means that as organic materials pass over the sensor, the biofilm consumes carbon. As it consumes carbon, it respires electrons, and we count the rate at which carbon is consumed. In other words, we're measuring the ability of the biology in the process to treat the wastewater, or for laymen like me, a heart rate monitor for the biology. If the line goes up, there's been a large organic load coming in like brewery waste. If the line goes down, there's less carbon available due to a number of things like toxic chemicals or heavy rain events. Operators are quickly learning how to use real-time information to prevent disaster and optimize processes. We've identified 7 clear problem statements in wastewater processes based around the Century probe. There are 2 reasons for that versatility. We go where other sensors can't, and there are biological processes taking part throughout the system. 85% of our clients start with the primary clarifier to get an understanding of what is coming into the plant with enough early warning to act on it. Then they do one of 2 things. Move into the collection system to get an early warning and locate large industrial dumps. It's amazing what you'll find with real-time monitoring when you've got new craft breweries in town dumping a lot of crazy stuff down the pipes. Or we go into the plant to optimize a process such as anaerobic digestion, aeration, or carbon dosing. That way operators can look great based on evidence rather than smell or gut feel. We're easy to deploy remotely and have shipped around the world during COVID. At this time last year, we had about 25 systems deployed. Join your colleagues in making better decisions that save time, money, and effort. We have options to pilot for 6 or 12 months, and after that, 70% of our clients purchase us through a subscription model, and the rest purchase us outright, with a year of service baked in. As a standard, we offer 2 probes per system to enable operators to have a complete picture of the impact of acute toxic shocks on performance. Our ask is that you think of a problem statement that resonates with you, and we're happy to discuss and work with you to solve it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John, for that insightful presentation and pitch. So again, we look forward to you joining us tomorrow for Lessons from Texas. And thank you for joining us today for a good, lively discussion.